couple coming. Heavenly Father, we are gathered here today so that we can become aware of what is happening to our beloved country. We are a group that took the time to come here to hear what our speaker has to say. So I ask that your blessings be on each and every one that is here. And we have a flag for, David, please do the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. I want to thank each and every one of you that's here this morning. I know it's not easy to get up. I'm training myself for that too. And but I have been a friend of David's for a very, very, very long time. And he has been in the places of the castle of things that go on, and he knows a lot. Besides the fact that he knows his own mission in life and what he did to survive for his family, also makes him the right person to be hearing about what we have done to get to where we are with education in New Mexico. I graduated from our schools, and along the way, when Bill Gates wanted to put computers in every classroom, they did an investigation about the education system because he was convinced that having desks with the things on a computer was more important than having a book. And so they did a study, and it turned out, I graduated in 1958, that I had the equivalent of what is in college today, the same education they're getting, I got in high school. So one of the things about education is all of us, whoever we are and whatever age we are, never thought that the education that the children were getting was different than what we got. We just believed that it was the same thing. And now we are in a position where almost our money that is being spent for education in the public eye is actually an education that would be detrimental to this country going forward. So, of all the things that we can do, the one thing that will accomplish the most will be to pay attention to education in however way we have to do it. And Dave is here today to witness to what he has been schooled in, I call it, in what the higher level of education is doing to achieve our children under their thumb instead of parents. Come on, Dave.
All right.
You have the floor.
Now, I'll just do it from here. Is that okay, or you want me to be up there?
No, it's, I don't know. Would you guys like him to stand up and talk?
Do you want me to stand up? You know,
Your voice carries.
our church will hold 800 people, and you know, if the microphone goes out, I can still project all the way to the back.
when you have 5 brothers, you learn to speak loudly without screaming. So
Well, if you would like to sit there.
I can just, I'll sit here and I'll not eat my food while I'm doing it, because one thing my mother taught me is don't talk with your mouth full. Just give you a little bit more background. My mother was an educator. She became a single mom when her and my father divorced in 1959. And she went back to school. She already had a degree in English. She went back to school at UNM and got a degree in education. And in 1960, I think it was 1961 or 1962, she started working for APS as a first grade teacher at Whittier Elementary. And Whittier now is a Title I school, has been for several years, but at that time it was kind of, you know, middle class and everything. And APS at that time was really one of the better districts in the country, let alone in the state. Now you sit there and say, well, why is that? Well, a lot of things changed after the 70s. You had lawsuits that said, you know, people in rural New Mexico aren't getting the same education, they don't have the same funding and things like that. So a lot of things changed to where rather than Albuquerque using the funds locally, they aggregated everything to the state level and dispersed it down. So the level of education in Albuquerque went down. Now, why was it better? Well, because we had Kirtland Air Force Base. We had Sandia Labs. Those fields, those professions really wanted highly educated, qualified individuals, and those people wanted good education for their kids, okay? If you go and you look at where New Mexico stagnates economically, how many of you remember, I forget the name of the aircraft company that was here in New Mexico 15, 20 years ago, they were building jets?
Eclipse.
Okay. They had trouble hiring engineers. And the reason given was the poor education system in Albuquerque. A lot of companies, when they come and look, if they just want robots working, Albuquerque may be fine. You know, call centers don't require a high level of intelligence because they have scripts and things like that to read, okay? But if you want people who will think creatively and will try to figure out problems and do things like that, you have to have an education system that actually teaches kids how to think creatively, not just rote memory, but to teach them creatively. You know, I saw recently that a study was done that followed a group of kids, and I forget how many students it was, but it was several hundred. When they were 2 years old, they measured the IQ. Now, how you measure IQ of a 2-year-old, I don't know. But they said the average IQ of a 2-year-old was about 180. By the time they were 5 years old, it was about 140. By the time they were 8 years old, it was down to 120.
Oh, wow.
Every year it kept going down. And they attributed it that these students were going into preschool, kindergarten, and elementary schools. They were getting dumbed down. And this is one thing that my mother, as a first grade teacher for 28 years, loved, was the creative thing. When she started having grandkids, and she wasn't around my grandkids because she was living in Kansas at this time, but my youngest brother had kids, and she lived by this little lake, and she would go down to the lake with them, and they would play pirate, and they would look for treasure, and they would do, you know, here my mom was, 60 years old, playing pirate with her grandkids, but it was that creative thing of just playing fun. Now I'll talk about it a little bit later, about what other countries do in terms of their education with young people and everything like that. We are so focused, and I taught at UNM. I taught financial management, which was kind of fun because everyone, if you wanted to get a degree in business, had to take financial management. It was 326. Everyone had to take it. So if you're getting a degree in, you wanted to focus on human resources, you had to take 326. If you wanted to focus on marketing, you still had to take 326, which is finance, which is a lot of math. Okay? How many people in here really like math? All right, I'm speaking to a great
Different
group.
generation.
Different generation. I took trig and calc in high school as an elective, okay? So we kind of are on the same wavelength, I guess, there. But the issue that I saw as an adjunct professor, starting in about 1996, okay? Former professor of mine, hey, Stuart, Mary, I know them. Starting as adjunct professor, one of my former professors of capital budgeting actually encouraged me to become an adjunct professor teaching finance. And I really enjoyed it, and I did it for about 15 years, in addition to working other jobs. But one thing I noticed in that 15-year period of time, the quality of the student went from here to here. And I'm not saying this, it was a dramatic drop in their math skills, in their English skills. I am not an English major. I took as little English as necessary, even though I enjoyed English in high school and I wrote poems and everything, and my teacher encouraged me and everything like that. But I was more numbers oriented, okay? So a lot of what I'm going to talk about will be some data and everything, but hopefully have plenty of time for your questions. Depending upon the quality of education, it can either be good or it can be bad. What I saw was the quality of education was dropping. And that's why finally, in 2009, I ran for the school board, okay? I actually decided, back then the election was in February 2009, I actually decided in late 2007 to run for the school board. I had all my business cards printed up in early 2008. I had all my flyers done and everything like that. Because I tell people, I said, if you want to run for election, don't do it. Don't start thinking about it a month before the primary. You have to start thinking about it a year or two before. You have to get prepared. Anyway, there's an economic impact, obviously, what we've seen in Albuquerque, okay? What I talked about earlier about why we had a high quality education system. It was independent from the state. It was independent from the federal government, okay, in New Mexico. It really was. And Albuquerque especially, because they tried to focus on that. Los Alamos, right now, their school system is average or below average when you look at national things. It used to be the top in the country. New Mexico, I remember taking the ACT and SAT scores, and I was in New Mexico, I was 92 percentile, 92 to 98, 92 to 96 percentiles, okay? And they said the reason is because Los Alamos, that's setting the standard for the state. It's not the way anymore. It's not that way anymore. And that's sad. You kind of think, well, what have we done to destroy the education system? The problem that you get is if you have a poor education system, you're not going to have the economic development that you want because industries don't want to locate there if they need intelligent people. Some will, and they'll come for a while because of the economic incentives the state offers. We'll throw a few $1 million at you to come in and start a company here, and they're here for a little while and then they leave. Because again, if the workers look at what their students are getting in the public schools and they say, well, I can't afford to put them in a private school, I don't want to have to do that, they're going to go elsewhere, okay? I mean, it used to be that New Mexico and Mississippi is on a lot of scales is considered the bottom. Okay, Mississippi and New Mexico used to trade 51st. 50th, 51st, counting DC is another one. We used to be down there between 50th and 51st. New Mexico's still down there. Mississippi has already moved up to around 40th. Okay, now they may be below on income averages, below on a lot of other things, but their education system actually improved. Okay, why isn't New Mexico's moving up or doing anything different? Okay, a lot of huge economic impacts. Individual prosperity. If you can't get a good education, this is the thing that I said, if you cannot read and write properly, and I'm not an English major. But if you cannot read and write properly, you're gonna struggle in almost everything. If you can read well, you can learn almost anything. You can pick up books, and especially now, I mean, you can go online and watch a video or read, and you can figure out how to do just about anything you want to do. I mean, my goodness, I just changed the batteries in my son's track system motor because it was beeping at me and everything when I was lifting him, and it's like, oh, get up the manual and say, oh, you need to replace the batteries. So, yeah, I took it apart, replaced the batteries and everything. You know, a lot of people would say, well, I have to call a technician. I have to pay $300 to have someone who can change the batteries. No, you don't. It was very simple. My wife sat in the bed handing me the tools and everything so I could do it. But it's not that complicated, okay? Crime and poverty are indirectly related to the education, okay? Because you have a poor education system, you have a poor economy. You have a poor economy, you tend to have more crime, okay? I don't go with the thing that a poor economy causes someone to be a criminal, okay? There's this thing, and you know, you have a lot of people say, well, we're spending $100,000 a year on every criminal, and we only spend, you know, $15,000, $20,000 per student. That's horrible. We should be spending. It's like, yeah, but you're mixing apples and oranges. You're not comparing the same thing. You know, if you have one mass murderer and it costs you $300,000 to keep that mass murderer incarcerated, guess what? I think it's well worth it.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. But you want to have well-qualified teachers. You want to have a functional classroom, and you want to have a functional education system. Lacking those things, your education quality is going to drop. Okay, and in a little bit I'll talk about the unions and why I think the unions have been detrimental. New Mexico has 89 school districts. Okay, if you live in a school district and you want to go to a district school and you live in the boundaries of that local school, your neighborhood school, whether it's high school, middle school, or elementary school, you can go there. They can't keep you out. Okay, they have to let you in. Now, periodically, because of demographic shifts, populations moving within the city and everything, they have to change boundaries. Because you can't have a school that was built for, you know, 600 students, all of a sudden having 800 students, and another school that was built for 600 students now only have 300 students. So you move boundaries around periodically, okay? But if you're within that boundary, you get to go to the district schools. Charter schools, there's 57 state charter schools right now, and I was on the PEC for about 5.5 years. State charter schools, and you have district charter schools, and you sit there and say, well, wait a minute, why would districts have charter schools? You know, districts have their own schools. Why do they set up charter schools? Well, a charter school for a district is kind of like a magnet school, okay? What are magnet schools? Magnet schools are schools within a district that they set up that are specifically designed to focus on a certain area of education. It could be math and science, it could be the arts, it could be something else, okay? A magnet school typically will attract students from all around the district, but again, because it's a district school, if you live within that district, you get to go to that school. But they do attract students from other areas, okay, of the city. Now the big difference between a district school and a charter school. If you live within the boundary of a district school and they set parameters for busing, right? For elementary schools, I think it's a mile, middle school it's a 1.5 miles, and high schools I think it's almost 2 miles, okay? That you have to either find your own way to school or you walk, right? Now the funny thing is, if an elementary school, if you live 1.1 miles from, you get a bus. But if you live 1/2 mile, okay, or not even 1/2 mile, if you live 0.8 miles, a bus will come down to the end of your street and pick you up, 1/2 block away. And I'm like, okay, so you're gonna make a student walk 0.8 of a mile, or their parents have to drive them, but if you live just 0.2 of a mile further, the bus will come and pick you up 100 feet from your house. The thinking there just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? I mean, that's like saying, you know, if you have a cancer in your body and it's this big, it's not a problem. But if it's this big, it is a problem. you know, it doesn't make sense, right? I mean, to me, that's part of the logic that I think is lacking in the bureaucracy of what our school systems are. The enrollment in a public school, okay, is never capped. They'll move in portables, they'll do whatever they have to do to accommodate temporarily the population that is going to that school. You have the ability to transfer out from a district school to another school, provided they have room, okay? But charter schools are very different because they have what's called a cap, okay? They apply and they have a cap of maybe 100, maybe 200, maybe 1,000, depending upon what they have asked their authorizer to do, whether it's the school district or whether it's the State Public Education Commission, okay? That cap limits the number of students you can have, not on average, but at any one point in time, okay? So some schools will say, well, you know, we started the year a little low, but then more students wanted to come in, and so we think our average is within our cap. No, the cap is the cap, right? It's kind of like in this room. There's a seating capacity in here, and the fire marshal isn't going to sit there and say, oh, well, you had, you know, 50 people in the morning and only 20 in the afternoon, therefore you met the fire code. No. It doesn't work that way with caps, okay, either. So it's very, very important to understand what that is. Then of course you have a lot of private schools, right? You have private schools, some of them are church or you know, religious affiliated, okay? And you have non-affiliated private schools, okay? We have a couple of really good private high schools in New Mexico, in Albuquerque, Sandia Prep and Albuquerque Academy. Albuquerque Academy is considered one of the top preparatory schools in the country, believe it or not. Still is one of the top. And I'm going to get to a point with the difference between APS and Albuquerque Academy. Now, Albuquerque Academy can kind of pick and choose the students that go there, okay? But you don't have to always be high-income families to go to Albuquerque Prep, because if your student is really smart, they will cover your tuition, okay? They will pay the tuition, which is almost $30,000 a year now. And you say, wow! But that pretty much covers everything, okay? Now, the public education department is under the governor. That wasn't always the case. Public education department used to be under a state board of education. Governor Richardson came in 2020 or 2003. He said, you know what? We have a U.S. Department of Education that is under, they were the secretary appointed by the president. I want the Department of Education in New Mexico to report to me too. Okay? That further harmed education. Okay? Further harmed. Because it became a political pawn. Now, education was already on the downtrend before that. It just, I think, accelerated the process of downward movement of education. But he wanted to have this control, and so now it's, you know, and with our current governor, in her first 2 years, she had 3 different secretaries of education. One died. That's not her fault, I hope. You know, I mean, she's related to the Clintons, our governor, so you never know, you know, if there's something there when there's 50 some odd people that mysteriously died related to the Clintons. You kind of have to wonder. But no, she was hit by a car, you know, in the evening and everything. So I don't know.
Yeah.
And you say, well, you know, was that an accident or not? I really believe that was an accident. The local board of education, every district has a board of education, elected by the people who live within that district, registered voters within that district. Okay. Boards of education are anywhere from 5 to 7 in New Mexico. APS has 7. And they serve 4-year terms, typically, staggered. New Mexico is staggered. And they change everything to try to get it to align with the November election, get municipal elections and things like that, to attempt to get higher turnout, okay? When I ran for the school board and won, I ran against a 26-year incumbent. She was the president of the board, and I got 56% of the vote. It was a change year, okay? It was the year Obama was elected. I wasn't riding on its coattails because APS board is nonpartisan, and I was probably as far to the right from Obama as you can possibly get. I'm very, very conservative, especially fiscally, the way things should operate. Socially, I have a disabled son, so I look at we need to take care of those who can't take care of themselves. But I am very, very adamant about I don't necessarily put out much of a helping hand to someone who is unwilling to help themselves.
Yeah.
Okay? But there's a difference, okay? Because I have a gifted son, I have a middle son who's very severely disabled, and then I have a daughter who is very intelligent, but she's not gifted, but she has done very well for herself in her life and in her marriage and everything. But the local board is supposed to be responsive to the voters. Okay, they should reflect what the voters want. The problem is you get a lot of special interests that come into any election, and school boards are especially that way. Now, I haven't kept track of spending, but 6-7 years ago, they were spending $100,000 to $200,000 to elect a person to the school board in Denver. You know, when I ran for the school board the first time, it cost me $2,500, and most of that was out of pocket. Second time I ran, it was about $3,000, and again, most of that was out of pocket. And it was mostly just printing, because I didn't do mailings, didn't have enough money to do mailings and things like that. It was a lot of door-to-door stuff and word of mouth, okay? But when school districts get, you start getting, you know, where school board, you know, in APS, they aren't paid. They get a per diem to go to a meeting, but it's nominal. I mean, it might be a couple of $1,000s a year that you earn, okay? But you're not doing it because it's a full-time job necessarily, okay? You're doing it because you should be doing it because you care about the education of the children in the district, okay? And when I ran, people asked me, they said, well, do you have any kids in school? No. Do you have any grandkids in school? No. Then why on earth are you running for school board? Well, I'm a professor at UNM. I'm a manager, you know, privately, and I have to hire people. I have to evaluate people, and I'm seeing the decline here, and I want to get involved because it's important as a father, as a member of our community. I think it's very important that we have a good education system. And again, reflecting back to the way things were in the 60s, when my mom was making enough money so she could take care of a family of 7, my 6 brothers and her. My father was working and contributed, but it was a minimal amount, okay? And it wasn't because, you know, he was shirking his responsibility. That's the way it was set up, and he was starting a business and doing things. But the thing is she was able, she had a car, she was able to do things, and it's like, wow, what has changed over time? A lot of bad things, okay? Now let's look at APS specifically. In the 1980s, APS had almost 90,000 students. 90,000 students. They had 133 schools. By 2014, they were down to 82,000 students and 144 schools. Now wait a minute. They have 8,000 fewer students, but they added almost 11 schools. You're like, what's wrong with this math, right? In May, this is on the dashboard of APS. They have roughly 70,000 students and 143 schools.
Oh my God.
They closed 1 school. 143 schools, but yet they have 20,000 fewer students than they did at their peak, but they have 10 more schools than they did at their peak. 20,000 students fewer. Now here's another statistic. When I was on the school board, they were, starting in 2009, they had roughly 12,000 employees. You know how many employees they have now? Roughly 12,000. And you're saying, wait a minute, you have so many fewer students. Oh, but we have all these schools we have to maintain and everything like that. So some of the employees are maintenance people and things like that. But wait a minute, you don't need them. Again, I understand education is different from running your local Starbucks or your local, Walmart or your local CVS. It's different. But when you're running the operations, I'm not talking about the classroom, when you're running the operations of buildings and facilities, that shouldn't be any different from it is in private business. You have so many students, you have buildings that are designed for so many students. APS doesn't rent any facilities. They build and own their own facilities, okay? You can sit there and say, that's great, that's bad. Stuart used to be in the facilities area of APS. He can tell you some horror stories about that. But it is a real problem when you lose 20,000 students and you have the same number of physical buildings, if not more, than you did when you had fewer students. And I'm like, wait a minute. Why do you have the same number of employees? Why do you still have 6,000 teachers for 70,000, and they're projecting only 68,000 coming in the fall? And you're like, well, wait a minute. Now, part of the reason of that drop, people are going to charter schools. Part of that reason is people are going to private schools. Part of that drop is people are going to homeschooling. Okay? I homeschooled for 2 years my daughter in high school because she had some issues with school. The school wasn't being responsive, and it was one of the better high schools, El Dorado. But there were issues that we had with the way they were meeting my daughter's needs. Okay, and even though they say, "Oh yeah, we'll do this and this and this," and when you find out later they aren't doing that, it's like, okay, time to pull her out. The issues within the schools have been allowed to happen because we have a weak school board. I can't tell you the number of 6-1 votes I was on, and you can just imagine who was the one vote. Me. There were a lot of 7-0 votes I agreed with. But generally, I never approved any of the union contracts, and this is why. Not because I was anti-union, okay? I'm not really in favor of public unions, okay? I think that was very detrimental, and you can go back and you look at the history of public unions. Even FDR was not in favor of public unions. He thought it was a bad idea, okay? Get a public union involved in the military, and that's the end of this country, okay?
Yeah.
It's kind of that way with the woke policies that they've adopted and everything, okay? But public unions, any union, their primary reason to exist is to make things better for their members and to maximize the wages that they can get, right? That's their purpose. Their purpose in a education union, the purpose is not to improve education. The purpose of a union representing teachers is to get them the most money with the least restrictions possible and the most difficult way of getting them fired. That's the purpose of the union. Okay? Where's laws and things like that in place to protect workers' rights, to protect their safety and things like that. We don't need a union, especially in the public sector, to protect those things. So their main job is to maximize the workers, and the APS I think deals with 5 different unions. Maximize the wages, minimize any individuals, members getting fired, things like that. Okay? So when they sit there and say, "Oh, we're all in favor of the union and everything. We're really for your students." No, they're not. That's platitudes. That's it's platitudes. Is another word for lying. Okay? They aren't there to better your child. Okay? They can sit there and say, "Oh, we want better schools, we want this and we want that and everything." I was chair of the finance committee for 2 years. I was chair of the capital committee, and they used to come in with the architects and everything and show us the wonderful awards the architects got for building an APS school that the taxpayer paid for.
Right.
And it's like, I said, I don't want to have any more of these award ceremonies unless you can show me the data that says these award-winning schools are bettering the students' performance. And guess what? There's no data, there's no correlation. Volcano Vista, and you can say, well, it's the quality of students going in. I don't care. Volcano Vista is one of the worst performing schools in the state. And it was the most expensive school to be built in this state at the time. And if you take current construction costs and everything, it's still the most expensive school that was built in the state of New Mexico. If you go and look at it, fancy rock and tile and stuff like that. I mean, I've been there. I've been to Volcano Vista. Beautiful school. You go to the library. Oh my goodness, they have these 40-foot high windows that look out at the mountains. Wonderful. What happens with that library when the sun comes up in the morning? You have to heat. You have to cool that. It's a Dutch oven. Yeah, you have to cool that. And one thing I explained, I said, don't look at square footage. When you're heating and cooling, it's cubic feet of space that you're heating and cooling. So the higher the ceilings, the larger the facility, the hallways. You go to Volcano Vista and they have these 30, 40 foot high areas and these student gathering areas that have these huge, you're like, what's the purpose of these high? Well, it keeps down the sound and this and that. And I said, put some soundboards up there. You don't have to have, I mean, whoa, come on, guys. I'm not an architect, but I've worked with them for years and I know better. Anyway, APS, same number of students. APS for this coming year, they proposed a $2.2 billion budget for 68,000 students. Now you can do the math. It's almost $32,000 per student. Now what did I say the tuition at Albuquerque Academy is?
30, yeah.
$28,149 this coming school year. $4,000 a year different. Cheaper.
Yep.
Now, they say it doesn't include everything. Albuquerque Academy. You have to buy your student in high school, you have to buy them a laptop. Okay? Okay, well, I mean, what's a laptop cost these days? $1,000? 450, 500, less than 1,000. You only have to buy it once unless they throw it or break it or something like that. That's a one-time cost, okay? Some incidentals for certain classes, where there may be some supplies or something like that. But it's not $4,000 a year, okay? Now, to keep apples and oranges the same, Albuquerque Academy doesn't necessarily accept everybody, nor do they have to. They're a private school, okay? APS does. APS has a high percentage of special ed students. Now, special ed includes gifted. Gifted students don't require a lot of physical things to provide for them, right? You can put them in advanced placement classes. You can do different things where it doesn't require, eight students per teacher. Okay, my middle son is disabled. He was, disabled all of his life since birth, and he was in APS. And what's really interesting is when it came time for him to move up, we had IEPs, individual education plans, every year. But when he got to the going from elementary to mid school, he was 11. He was turning 11 that summer. He was born July 4th, Independence baby. They said, well, he's going to be 11, so he has to go to 6th grade. I said, why? Other than his chronological age, why does he have to go to 6th grade at Madison? Because he's in a wheelchair. He's the size of a first grader. He was very small. Yeah. He intellectually is not that of a 5th or 6th grader. So why does he have to move up? Well, because he's 11. I said, no. You know what chronological means? Time. Other than his chronological age, why should he move up? And they would just kind of hem and haw. This wasn't a teacher. I already checked with the teacher. This is the thing I learned in pre-law. You always, before you ask the question, know the answer. I had already asked the teacher, can he stay with you? She said, oh yeah, I'd love to have him again. So for 2 years we kept him, and I said, now, Miss Vice Principal, I know my rights. I'm gonna hold him back. My mom and I were holding him back, and we want him to stay with the same teacher. And she had already told us, it's okay, he can stay with me. We did that for 2 additional years. The summer he was turning 13, we allowed him to go to Madison. But I said, now, if it doesn't work out, he's coming right back. They're like, oh, okay. Fortunately, he had gone to the preschool for the deaf when he was 3 and 4 years old. They actually let him stay through being 5, kindergarten year, because they liked him so much. and they knew that APS just wasn't really on par. He's deaf, by the way, so the preschool for the deaf. The teacher that saw the class roles that were given to her that summer, before he actually started school, saw his name and immediately accepted a job with APS. She wanted to be his teacher again. And for 3 years, she was his teacher. He grew so much. Not that in elementary school he didn't, but he just blossomed under her. That's the difference between a good teacher and a poor teacher. She loved working with him. She had a brother who was disabled. So she was a special ed certified teacher from Iowa. Okay? Wonderful, wonderful lady. Wonderful lady. And our son loved her. Now, APS has to take special ed students, disabled, things like that. A lot of English language learners. I'll get into some of the statistics here. But go to the dashboard, because I pulled off a lot of numbers here I'm going to give you off the dashboard. APS has lost 2,000 students last year to this coming year. 2,000 students fewer. 20,000 students over the last 20, 15, 20, 25 years. I mean, that's tremendous. Albuquerque is not shrinking in size, but they're losing a lot of students, okay? Now, their reduced and free lunch is 80%. That's up 11%. Now, is that APS's fault, or is that an indication of the economy? It's probably a combination of both. Because what they've done is, if you have a Title I school where at least 60%, I think it's 60% of your students are eligible for free, the school district can make the whole school Title I and pay for school for everybody, pay for lunches for everybody. Okay, fine. But there's a cost to that. English language learners are 19%. Almost 1 out of 5 students English is not their primary language, not their first language. Now you sit there and say, well, we have a lot of immigrants. Guys, we don't have 20% of the population that are immigrants. We have some of these students are 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation New Mexicans. And they still, their language in their home is not English. There's nothing wrong with that. But APS doesn't recognize that. When I was on the board, I said, okay, you're trying to teach a child English, and the parents at home speak Spanish. Why don't you have an adult program in the evening, bringing the parents in to help them learn English, to read and write English? And they looked at me like I was from another planet. And I said, oh, wait a minute. The kids spend a little bit of time in your schools, and the amount of time that you can physically spend with them and give them direct attention, if they have 15, even just 15 students in the classroom, 6 hours a day, you can figure it out. You're only getting 5 or 10 minutes of direct instruction, okay, of personalized instruction for them. If the parents can spend 30 minutes with them, reading to them and working with them, you've multiplied. And I said, shouldn't this be a partnership? Again, deer in the headlights. Well, why would we do it? Because you're serving the student by helping their parents read and write, because then they can help their students read and write, their children. Again, didn't make a whole lot of sense. 3rd grade English, special education, 23%. 10 years ago, it was 14%. Wow. I mean, really? Part of it is the ADHD. They're classified as, guess what? Special ed, autism, special ed, okay? Gifted, special ed, technically, they're classified as special ed. But we had to fight for our son, who had an IQ when he was 9 years old of 150. And they said, oh no, he's not gifted. IQ of 150. They tested him and said, oh, 150, huh? This was a week after his aunt died, who took care of him for 2 years when he was a baby. She had just died, and he still tested 150 on his IQ. And his teacher was like, oh, I don't think he's gifted. We don't need to do anything. We pressed and pressed and pressed to get him tested, and then finally said, yeah, he's pretty smart. Graduated high school, I was telling folks earlier, he graduated high school with a C average from Wecks, one of the best high schools in the state, supposedly. The C average. I was surprised when he walked across the platform in Johnson Gym and got his diploma, because we weren't sure he was going to, because the schools were doing such a horrible job. You know, he was gifted in math. He got a C and a D in math. When he went to TVI for 1 year, and he's taking college algebra, and he said, you know, I know this. I said, I know you know it. But his teachers, a lot of math people, right? You know how they were doing factoring? You take a number and you break it down, like, what is 84? What are the factors of 84? Well, you take, well, it's even number, so it's 2 is in there, and you take your 2, so 84 goes down to 42. Well, there's another 2 in that, so that's 21. Well, 21 is 3 times 7, right? So it's 2 squared times 3 times 7. That's factoring, right? Now, I can do that in my head. They had him using a calculator to figure it out. I mean, it's like, come on! If you know your math tables, you know your multiplication tables, you can do it in your head. You don't have to use a calculator. Come on. But that's what his high school math teacher was telling him to do factoring. I thought, oh man, we've got a problem. We've got a real problem here. He did graduate, but he didn't go on to college, just 1 year at TVI. A lot of the special ed students that are really what I call D-level, C or D-level special ed, okay, like my son was, he was D-level. He actually counted as 5 students in APS because of his multiple handicaps. Not only physically handicapped, but developmentally handicapped, okay, and deaf. So it's like, now we probably figure he's autistic too, okay? So it's like, so he counted as 5 students. So he actually got funding. APS got funding as though he was 5 students. You know, the per funding that they do this per capita funding or per student funding, and no student in APS is counted as 1 student. Did you know that? It's like 1.2, 1.5, 1.8. High school students get the most funding because of the diversity of the classes and with sports and everything like that. They give high school students a little bit more. Elementary tends to be a little bit higher. Middle school is a little bit less. But no one student really counts as 1. So they say the per student funding is X. Schools aren't given that amount. It's not number of students times that, because then you have to look at special ed. You have to look at all these other factors and everything. And no one student counts as 1. It's always 1 point something. I don't know why. Yeah, it's kind of weird math, don't you think? You know, the basic level isn't 1, it's 1.2. Really? It's now 4.0 is not the top grade. You can get a 4.5. What? And we have students, and I'll give you the number here in a second. We have students that are getting, 4.5s, taking AP classes, and they can't pass the AP test. AP students can't pass the AP test, but yet they put them in an AP class. Why? Because it's special ed, and guess what? They get more funding. See, it's all about the numbers. That's why, yeah. English language arts, 3rd grade English language arts, 38% proficient. 38%. That means 62%, my math's right, aren't proficient. Now, some of that's nearing proficient, but even if you take the nearing proficient, you're still well below 60%. Okay, that's actually an improvement of 5%. It used to be 33%. Now it's 38%. Ooh, big change. Now that's actually a pretty decent improvement to move up, from 33 to 5.8. That's pretty decent improvement. But we'll go on. 8th grade math, 26% proficient. That's a 1% improvement. Should have been 2 or 3% improvement year to year when you're that low. It should be easy to get at least a 10% improvement per year when you're that low. Easy. Kindergarten, 68% are ready for kindergarten. Now we have preschool, right? But they figured that only 68% of students are ready to go into kindergarten. That is a 3% improvement over the previous year. So it used to be 65%, now it's 68%. Okay. And I'm sure they'll attribute that to the wonderful job they're doing in pre-K. Because they don't really teach them how to read or write or anything like that. It's daycare. Four-year graduation rate. Now this is dramatic. 70% of students graduating this year over last year. Last year was 80%. This year, now it's 70%. Well, the previous couple of years, they gave them, we let them graduate even though they couldn't read or write. And I'm going to give you some other figures that will show you that they're still doing that. Family engagement, unchanged at 78%. And that's kind of a nebulous, difficult to measure thing of the number of parents coming in to talk, that come to open houses. I mean, I'm not really, the ones completing surveys, the ones that respond to, notes going home. I mean, parental engagement. Because I guarantee that's not the number of parents that are English language learners that they're teaching to help read, to help their students. Average daily attendance, 91%. That means on an average day, 9% of the students are in APS. 9%. That's why you see all these students wandering around and everything in the malls and everything during the school year. Now this is it's 91%. You say, okay, so there's 9%, but chronically absent. Chronically absent is that they miss at least 10 days during the school year. Now I remember I had perfect attendance when I was in 7th grade. Even though I went when I had a little bit of a cold and runny nose, I still went. I got perfect attendance that year. But 10 days, you're missing 10 days? 31% of students miss at least 10 days a year.
See why? Can I interrupt? Because I'm the one that's
You're the timekeeper.
timekeeper here, and you wanted to leave some time for questions.
Yeah. Let me just I have two more things and then I'll take any questions. Okay. The annual high school dropout rate is 4%. Annually. 4%, and high school is 4 years. So math people, how many percent is that? 16% of students that start high school don't finish. So that's the annual dropout rate. College readiness, only 39% of 11th grade are proficient on the SAT tests in reading. 18% are proficient in reading.
Oh.
Now, you go from 11th grade to 12th grade, and you're not going to increase your math proficiency a whole lot. 18% proficient. AP pass rate is 49%. Those enrolled in college after graduation, 58%.
Oh my God.
But yet they're not proficient in reading or math. Well, we're sending them out to college. Okay, huge problems. Okay, I talked a little bit about the influence of unions. Unions have been the worst things that have been, and they've gotten more and more power, more and more influence. I was taken out from the school board. That's fine. I have another life. The person that they put in there, okay, and I'll say they put him in there, okay, got his daughter hired. She is now the superintendent of APS. I went to the thing where they brought in two candidates. Two candidates are the finalists because one candidate withdrew and he was the most qualified. He withdrew. The other person that got up there and spoke, was invited. I get invited because I'm a former board member. I get invited to all these things. I don't go to half of them because they're worthless. Gabriella Blakey couldn't even communicate a vision for APS. And she was applying to be the superintendent. Of course, they hired her. The biggest detriment, I think, to education and everything is the lack of involvement. Oh, they talk about 78% involvement of parents. Yeah, that's not the same thing as them actively engaged and knowing what's going on in the classroom. APS still has a policy of not letting the parents know what's going on in the classroom. Campuses are closed, they're locked down. If they don't want you there, you can't be there. So I'll answer any questions you have. There's one quote I want to leave you with from Lincoln. A capacity and taste for reading, gives access to whatever has already been discovered by others. It is the key, or one of the keys, to the already solved problems, learning from history. And not only so, it gives a relish and facility for the successful pursuing the yet unsolved ones. Abraham Lincoln, 1859, before he was president. He was self-educated. He taught himself to read. Okay? Someone who has that desire can do it. We need to figure out how to instill that desire in individuals. Not, well, you never talked about the IQs of students that they say. Now, how they measure a 2-year-old, I don't know, but it seems that IQs keep going down every year, and it's the educational system and the bureaucracy that does it. So, any questions?
I'll handle that part of it, but I'm gonna take my little bit of ending to what David had to say. I'm sure all of you are impressed because I've known David a long time, back when he was actually on board, and I knew that he knew so much about this here we go again. So I asked him to come to talk to all of you. Obviously, he has more to say. And if you are interested, I will ask him to come back and to move the conversation over. But I myself personally got involved in politics because of education. And it broke my heart when they put money to early childhood development because they are not going to be doing early childhood development. And let me explain why. Through science, we can look at things that we couldn't look at before. I have a picture of 2 brains of 3-year-olds. One of them, the picture is a big mass of the brain. The other one is the brain has holes in it, little holes all over it. They will not, after the age of 3, be able to fill in those holes. So now that they can take over the children in the daycare centers, guess what the outcome is going to be then? And it's all about the money, all about the money. So I'm really appreciative that so many of you are interested in this subject because education is forever. And there is a way to circumvent what they have put in place. One of them is we should probably make him the governor. And then that will start the thing. But I will ask him back to continue into the other realm. But I do want you to know that right now we are on the brink of the children from the time they are born to the age of 3. If they are not getting the appropriate stimulation, they cannot fix it after the age of 3. So we have a job for us. So now, she was first. I'll ask you a question.
Sorry about that earlier. I'm curious to know if we have the data on, out of those absences, how many of those students are CYFD children? Because I know that CYFD is pulling children from class 2, 3, 4 times a week for visitation. And it counts as absences against them. They're missing out on for 2 hours, 3 hours every week.
Right. I don't know that information. It's not reported in the APS information on their dashboard. I mean, I'll give APS credit for putting out some of these numbers and actually showing the percent. I mean, I didn't calculate the percentage changes. They have the percentage changes right on their dashboard. So they're at least being transparent in that aspect. But that is an important thing. And that goes to the governor telling CYFD, stop doing that. You know, have them visit on weekends, have them visit, you know, during the evenings. You don't have to pull them out of school for a visitation. That is wrong, because you can't be an education governor, okay? I mean, I worked for the state under Governor Martinez. I was appointed to 2 different positions, one at Tax and Rev and one at Workforce, okay? As the administrative director and as CFO of those agencies, okay? But you have to understand, she wanted to have retention in 3rd grade, up to the parents. Give the parents, but actually give the parents that choice. Schools don't even want to offer that, to say, oh, you can hold them back. See, they don't want to tell you what your rights are. You have to go find out what your rights are. That's an important aspect of one agency overriding another agency, and it's in conflict with your stated goals. So you kind of have to wonder if those stated goals are really goals.
Okay, what I would like to do is I'm going to go down. You have a question, and you, and you, and you, and then we'll go around that way. So that would be the best way to take up the next time we have. We do have at this time 30 minutes, but you have to be out at the end of that. So, you are the next one.
3 comments basically. One, moved here in 1991 from Salt Lake City, where my 5-year-old son was reading 4-letter words up there. Lion. Sam has a lion. Sam feeds his lion. We got down here to the school, moved him into kindergarten, I guess is what it was in. And there they were learning their L's. Learning the alphabet when my son was already reading. And it was a bit of a detriment to him. Then I was blessed to be able to take my kids to Europe and Israel for 13 months, where the corporate put them in a private school and they tested them. And they said, well, we're not sure that they'll be able to go back into the 6th grade and the 4th grade, or not back into, but the next year thing. We'll test them. And my wife and I were sure that after APS they wouldn't make it. And the principal told us they're not really quite ready, but they showed potential. So we're gonna put them in the grade APS would put them in, but don't be disappointed in 3 weeks if we don't drop them back and have them redo it. My wife and I are always very involved in the education, and they not only stayed in their course, but they excelled at it. And then they were the ones that were able to tell my wife and I that my oldest son had dyslexia. APS, 6 years, weren't able to do that, but there in 3 months they were able to tell him and give him the skills to overcome it, where he was able to go to UNM and get 2 college degrees. And the other thing was about foreigners. My mother-in-law came from Odessa, Russia, when she was, well, she was from Germany at that point, but she was about 16, couldn't speak or read in English or anything. And then when she had my wife, and my wife was in school, she learned to read English by having her daughter read her 1st grade books to her, and then she would read it back, and that's how my mother-in-law learned, because they did it. And when you were talking about the parents don't know and everything, yeah, I can fully see and everything. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Well, thank you, I appreciate that. I'm a 2nd generation on my father's side. He came from Austria-Hungary before the First World War. He immigrated in 1910, before the big war, which is now the Czech Republic, okay, North Bohemia.
Yeah.
2nd generation. On my mother's side, I go all the way back to the Revolutionary War. So I can be a SAR, Sons of American Revolution. On my mother's side, she went through the whole thing. So I have these 2 cultures, these 2 aspects that I deal with. Legal immigration, great, wonderful. People who want to come here want to better themselves and everything. And then you have those that was here when the founders were here. But yeah, what you say is, I've talked with dozens of parents that have basically told me the same thing. In APS, they saw this degradation of their students' abilities and their learning. When they got them out of APS, all of a sudden they started seeing them improve.
Next. If you do not have a question.
I have a question.
That's your
This is
turn.
my first, good morning. This is my first meeting here. And so I'd like to know, what are the goals for education? What do we have in a plan? If I could be shared with me.
One of the things that we have to face is that there has been so many years that has degraded what we can do. We have to have people that are so committed to this project, because the way you're going to have to do it, and I am talking to someone right now that understands what I am saying. And I am saying what he actually alluded to in his thing. Teach the mother, and you will teach the children.
Yes.
And if we will provide that education to the moms, especially their first child, okay, then we will have the ability to make changes, not necessarily right away, but within 3 years, you will see a big, big change that will happen. So, We the People of New Mexico is having these because we want to encourage people to get out the vote. Because if we can get to the vote and get good people into our legislature, then we will have a better chance of being able to establish these methods that will bring us back to where I was at, and where, and it was funny because he was talking about the change that came was like after I had graduated from high school. So we've got to go backwards. We don't have to go forward. We really have to go backwards in this. So that's the reason that we're having these meetings, and I will ask him to come back to continue on this path. If that helps you, and you're still attending, really, if you're not hooked up with our list of subscribers,
Okay.
where you can get all the information, I'll get that for you before you leave.
Okay. Yeah, my mother was a school teacher. Her mother was a school teacher. So it was like, you could read by this age. There was no, you just did it because that's what the parents. I've got a grandson and a granddaughter, so we're reading, and it's just, I understand because if the mom didn't grow up in that environment, she can't pass on
That's
what
right.
she doesn't know.
That's right.
So I like the idea.
I
of
come from the
educating.
days when the Navy had a book that was cloth.
Yeah, I remember those.
So that
Yeah.
the baby could be playing with education,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Mary, your turn. You have any things that you want to ask?
Well, I think, years ago, that we were at some sort of meeting. We lived down in South Valley, and there was a little girl there, and they were talking about, and this was probably 20-some years ago, they were talking about how they needed to put all this money into reading programs and this and change that. And there was a little girl there who was homeschooled, and she's, raises her little hand. She said, "You just sit down with the kid with the book." I mean, her little siblings, and there was, and it's free, and it was just, it's shocking that we have made it into such a problem, that it's really a joy, but that reading's been, it's got to be forced down your throat, and I think a lot of the things are all the, tablets and those kinds of things. I'm a pediatric physical therapist, and I'm seeing like the autism, what's happening now, and I've seen just beginnings of studies that are happening, that they're finding that the children who are exposed to screens, you see these babies with screens, rather than a little book or a toy or something. And there's a new version of autism that's coming forward from that early exposure and the retraining of the brain, related to that. So I think there's a whole nother wave of problems coming for education, you know, as well.
Well, we can get that pointed in a new direction. I do plan to have the private schools and the homeschool leadership to come and give us what they're doing, which would be not the next meeting, but would start the meeting after that, because we will have a meeting every single week between now and the election. We won't have it on election day, but we'll have it the week before. And we have a candidate here, and we have a candidate over here, and having candidates here. And then I want to put Robert up for Secretary of State for the next go round, because you have to start now.
I'm already working on it, don't worry. They're gonna be blitzkrieg like they never seen.
And this, for you raising your hand, for your wife or for you?
Well, actually, for me,
Because he's working already in it.
well, I was surprised, David, when you talked about the, 1.2% does that cap also work with charter schools? With their cap on charter schools? So do charter schools have that same formula with students, where a student is, like your student was worth?
The funding?
Yeah.
The way they're funded, yes, it's the same.
Okay,
The-
but it
the
doesn't count
funding
towards
is-
a cap? So, I mean, if you have a cap for your charter school and you have one kid being funded for 5 kids, does that mean that affects the cap?
No.
Okay, so that was
It's the
one.
It's
Cap
between
is
bodies.
the cap is actual students.
Students, okay, that's what I wanted to
Doesn't
make sure
affect
that
the
was the
funding
case.
formula.
And the second thing I wanted to ask about, been reading in the Epoch Times about what happened with Mississippi. We went and saw a lady that was instrumental in Mississippi's turnaround, and they're actually 22nd in the nation now. They have skyrocketed. And the two things that I understood was, one, the governor agreed to retend any kid out of 3rd grade. If they were not proficient in reading, they had to go back and attend 3rd grade again, and then they threw all sorts of resources at that kid.
Right.
They took reading as if you could pass, if you couldn't get the reading. But the other thing I read about was they have a whole different methodology for reading. They use phonics. And that they changed the mechanism we're using. I'm not really familiar with it, but they use we in New Mexico and most of the states use a different reading curriculum, basically, that's not phonics based. And so for me, I can't understand, if the evidence is so clear, what is stopping us from changing our curriculum to a phonics based curriculum?
People who are in charge. And that's why we have to do the vote. Everybody needs to know that 78% of registered voters are not voting. It is time for us to understand that number and talk to everybody you come across, tell them that number, so they will stop saying, oh, and we can then get some change moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I'll give you a quote from the Bible. All things old have become new. Or all things new.
Well, it's time.
All things old become, in other words, we think we're doing things that are new. No, you go back to the way things used to be done. Ancient history was passed down not by writing, but by word of mouth. The Bible even tells us, teach your children as you walk down the road. Teach your children when they're going to bed. It's the parents' responsibility. The parents have abdicated that in large part, and the school systems now say, oh, now it's our right to take that responsibility away from the parents. No, it's not your right. Parents in a lot of cases have abdicated it. You need to pull that back, but the parents have to be willing to take that active role in their child's education. That's the most important thing. And The retention, Governor Martinez tried to do that. She couldn't get it through the legislature. Tried to get it through by third grade. And again, giving the parents the option, but if they weren't proficient, you would still throw a lot of reading resources at that child to benefit them in fourth grade and on. Didn't want to do it. And the legislature didn't want to even fund it. See, that was a big thing, come down to the money of their pet projects and things. So that's a problem.
Again, we're looking on the wrong side of the coin, you know, a coin has two sides. Because the mom is the key factor. And if we deal with that factor, even a minimum of response to it, we'll be better off than we are right now. Dwayne, do you have anything?
I do. David, in 2004, Congress passed a law that said any school that receives federal funding on September 17th should talk about the Constitution. To your knowledge, is that done anywhere in New Mexico or APS? And what's your opinion about just civics education in general?
I'm not sure that APS is doing that. I know when I was at the school board, it wasn't pressed and influenced. You know, civics, basic civics or social studies has really deteriorated, and with the DEI push over the last several years, I think it's exacerbated the decline, that they're getting into all these touchy-feely things rather than the basics. We care more about how someone feels rather than about if they can read or write. Like I've said before, if you can read, you can learn almost anything. And if you can't, you'll struggle at learning almost everything. But yeah, APS needs to get back. And again, people in this room talking with your friends, your neighbors, your children, if you have children in school, or your grandchildren, talking with your children to talk with their teachers, getting involved, talking with the politicians, writing letters, not one letter every few years. Write a letter every month to your legislator. Doesn't matter if they're Republican, Independent, you know, Democrat, write letters complaining about things. Get involved. Believe it or not, letters and communications to the legislature do mean something, because if they have enough people against them, they will change their opinion. Too many politicians waver. They'll go with whatever the political environment, rather than doing what's right and what they know is right, they'll do what is politically favorable.
My name is Bruce Gustin. I'm a teacher in Rio Rancho.
Bruce?
If, as Madeline hypothesizes, you were governor, what one singular dramatic change in education in Mexico would you make?
Mention one time.
The one thing, I would put PED back under a state board of education. And have a superintendent of education in New Mexico.
One person.
One person. Rather than being politically under the governor, have it under a board of education, people who care about education and want the best in education.
I'll go for that. Okay, thank you.
Can I make one comment on that? Because that was a proposal that was on the legislature this last time. The problem was that they were, what they were gonna do was they were gonna take the PEC, which was what they used. The PEC was, public education was the school board before.
Right.
And their intent this time was to take the PEC and make it back in, and take away the oversight of, or just make the oversight of charter schools a minor part of that commission's work. And so when you see that legislation coming up, please be aware that we need a separate school board, not use the PEC to make a new school board, because they can use the same districts, but we got to be really careful. The PEC really does good work as a overseers of authorizers for charter schools. We don't need to be taking that group and watering it down with it as being a part of the.
Yeah. See, it's one thing to take a school board and make it over charter schools, and then over time, the people who run for the PEC aren't necessarily focused on education for the state. They get focused on the authorizing of a charter school. Very different perspective and everything. And it's not to denigrate any of the PEC members, but many of them don't have the experience or knowledge or anything to be school board members, okay? When I was on the school board, I got along with the administration, but I didn't agree with the administration, and they didn't agree with what a lot of I did. But you know what's really funny? Most of the employees would come to me and say, Dave, you're the first person that we had on the school board that knew finance. You're the first person on the board that knew about capital projects and about building and things like that. You're the first person that I've heard talking about these things. That's the problem. We get people in these positions that like the title, and like I said, I didn't have kids or grandkids in school in the 4 years I was on the school board. That's not why I was on the school board. And I didn't have any friends or neighbors. And I had one friend, but she was a PE teacher. But people asked me, they said, well, can you get me hired or hired? And I said, well, if I can get you hired, I can get you fired. I said, I don't have any influence and I won't. I said, but if I know you well and I think you have credentials, I'll be happy to give you a letter of credit. But I'm not going to try to influence the hiring or firing. That's not my job as a school board member.
But well, the school board's now used as a springboard for political, going up. If you want to be a representative or whatever, that I started at the school board, then you go county commission, and then you go, and that's seemingly what those things are used for at this time.
We're moving on to the next person.
Mike, simple question. What's this big monument up here? Right up the street.
That is the Bonifacio Educational Monument of something or other.
Parking lot is.
I was
Parking lot's
totally,
big enough for 600 or 800 cars.
I was totally opposed to that building when they proposed it. I got off the school board. It was unnecessary. The cost of building it and maintaining it, I think it cost $20 million to build it.
Yeah.
Generally, and Stuart told me, what I've heard is that it can cost 10% of the cost of build it to maintain it every year.
Oh,
So APS is spending $2 million a year to maintain that facility. Now, they don't. You could rent facilities in hotels around that have conference centers and things for less than $2 million a year for all the training that they do. APS bought, back 30 years ago, they bought the Uptown facility that they're in, which has large conference rooms and everything that they can accommodate 100 to 200 people in. They wanted something they could put 600 people in. Well, for how often do you do that? It's not being used 95% of the time.
I live right almost across the street from that
It's
place.
not used most of the time.
The parking lot's empty, except there's
Well,
20 cars in
that's
the
what I
parking
was
lot.
saying.
That was funded for the teachers union. The teachers unions drove that.
Needs to be
Is it
said.
right?
Yeah, they wanted that.
Well,
But this is the problem, and you put someone's name who used to be on the board in Bonifacio. I met her and everything, and God bless her. But I told APS, I said, not that you would ever put my name on anything, but I will forbid you from ever putting my name on a building because that's not why I serve on this. I helped build a multi-million-dollar facility at our church, and the pastor had a plaque made with my name on it. And after he left, I said, I don't want that thing put up. I said, melt it down. I said, that's not why I did it. I don't want my name on anything.
I would like to point out that APS and the city of Albuquerque are there to build and make jobs. That is what they are doing and have been doing it for quite some time. But it's starting to be awareness coming with, we're going to do homeless, and then they buy the hotels and everything. The city has no right to own that kind of property. They have to do a library, they have to do the city hall. Those are things for government, not what they are buying. And they're buying that for the real estate, they're buying it for the unions to have jobs. Remember this, when we go up against what all is going on, the people that depend on these things happening for their livelihood, and you put it on out for a vote, they're voting their their job. So you have to make a very good reason that they have to vote against their job to make things right. So you gotta know the enemy, you gotta know what you're gonna have to fix that. Moving on. Go ahead.
I want to say thank you to everybody that's in the room this morning. We were the first ones in the room, and we were wondering if we were going to get them. Thank you very much, Dave, for your presentation this morning. I'm a little over 8 decades old, and I'm still learning, and you are teaching me, and I appreciate your participation this morning. Thank you.
And Robert?
Okay, well, Dave, you and I are on the same page. It turns out that this morning, actually, I made 9 videos having to do with education. And so I get up at 4 o'clock and I film because it's a little cooler in the house. But this is the problem with education. Okay, the fact that the kids are under the desk playing, games and everything, this is a solution, okay? It gets put in here, it's not a Faraday cage. It gets locked in there, goes around with the kids. The teachers have got one of these. It unlocks, okay? And I helped the kids of Tibet, actually the orphans of Tibet, because at 13,000 feet, mothers die in childbirth a lot, okay? And so these kids, there's a lot of orphans in Tibet. So the Tibetans pick them up because the uncles are drunk and the dads go crazy, and so they have all these orphans. And anywhere in the world, orphans are like gum stuck on the bottom of your shoe for some weird reason. And so they bring them to the school called Tadra, which I raised a lot of money for. These orphans, without parents, become the scholars, and they kick the kids in China's butts. And there's one reason why they're multilingual. They have all this social skills that Chinese kids don't have. They go to the annual testing and they win year after year after year. And there's one piece of secret sauce that they have. They sing all of their lessons. They sing their science lessons, they sing their math lessons, they are multilingual, they sing in the various languages, different songs, and that sets them up for reading because they do a karaoke type thing too. Norway is like #1 in the world. We should be doing what Norway does. They don't even bring their kids into school until they're 8 years old. They play with each other. They become kids, and this preschool stuff, like you said, it drills holes in their brains. So I'm going to force the governor into $10 million to buy one of these for every kid in New Mexico, and one of these for every teacher in New Mexico. $10 million it's a rounding error, okay? And immediately we'll see a jump because the kids are not distracted, the teachers are not distracted. As solutions need to be solutions, and the problem is, I need to know from you, the 9 of those 10 schools that need to be shut down tomorrow, take that money away from those schools, sell them, and turn it around into programs that actually make a difference, like this, okay? You stop a kid from using their phone during classroom hours. Los Angeles, one of the most liberal cities in America, they didn't do this. They said the kids can't use it in class, and they're just gonna do it under the desk. This stops the kid from doing it, and it's cheap. The set is $30 per kid on average, and so fast, in 1 year, we'll see our grades skyrocket because the kids are focused and they're more socialized. Immediately, they start looking at each other, they start communicating with each other instead of thumbing this thing all the time.
Well, we are in touch with Robert. Like I said, we really need him to be Secretary of State, we really do. And so,
We're gonna confront that evil quick.
and that starts like that. He has the talent of the way that people will learn. That is not the way we learn, but as long as they get to the same place, we're willing to give it a test. And
One more quick thing. flipnm.com. It's a website I've put up. I've now put 5 or 6 websites up to crush the evil of Emerge, which is where all of these teachers go from teachers to Emerge to politicians. We're the most saturated with Emerge alumni of any state in America, and that is what's destroying us as much as the unions, because it's a conga line of evil, and it has to be broken. So FlipNM is there to flipnewmexico.com.
And since we have the person here who has done all the investigation about Emerge, the plan is there. So we could use the plan, and we can call it Engaged, and get all the women that do not belong to Emerge into Engage, and let them fight it out. And we could do that very quickly, actually. Yeah, but
Well, I wore my shirt, I wasn't even thinking. And it says, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. And this is what we all need to get, is angry
we need
about
to
stuff. Yeah, because we've seen our kids. I, thank God, was in the early 70s graduation, so I got a good education. I had teachers that were, oh my gosh, we need to stop this. Look at our country.
Well,
What it's
looking
doing
at
to
your
it.
shirt, and
Yeah.
so we may want you to promote that a little bit more, because it has a great message.
Yeah, I got this on Amazon or whatever. Shouldn't have bought it from Amazon, but I had to have it. I wanted it. So, but
She
yeah.
also
Yeah.
bought a sign last election about voting. So,
Yeah,
you know,
your vote
we
is
can-
your voice.
Yeah, and by the way, when you have in your yard a sign, you are as good as a billboard, even better. Because in your neighborhood, they're gonna pass by you, and eventually, whatever you have on the sign is gonna make sense to them. So, all of us in here, you wanna do a little thing, order a sign that says, vote, it's your voice. You know, vote, you know, the Constitution, et cetera, whatever you can come up with. Put it in your yard, and your neighbors will be reading a billboard every morning and every afternoon. So,
One
that's
more
one
quick
way
thing.
you can do it tomorrow.
The 41 conservative candidates that are running, all of their websites will be linked off of Flip New Mexico to their website. So it's going to be a central repository, so you really know what's going on, because the Albuquerque Journal isn't going to do it, and nobody's going to do it. So that's what Flip New Mexico is about.
Mary,
I want to get to the addresses. FLIPNM.com.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to check the address you were talking about.
Yep. And it's under
I'll check
construction.
it.
So,
I'll check it.
you know, I'm editing like crazy and putting the videos up, and we're gonna probably do a 3-part series.
do you have a question?
No, just a comment. I'm having PTSD. My kids graduated in 2000 and 2004, and I moved 4 times to find good schools. I went to charter schools, I went to private schools. APS was just impossible. They've all since gone on to great careers in good colleges, but it was a nightmare getting into those schools, and I can see not much has changed.
Well,
Just get
we're happy
Yeah.
that everybody is getting an education, because, you know, getting up and getting here is, you know, you have to be committed to do that, and I really appreciate everyone that showed up today. Mary, what about you?
Just ask David Robbins one question. My grandson is slated to go to Volcano Vista High School. Eventually, you said it was one of the worst high schools in
Overall.
Overall. Does that mean performance of the students or academics?
Yeah.
How do I get that information? Is there a way to find out?
You can drill down on the school site information. Go to APS, aps.edu.
Make it readily available.
And you can find the information by the school. Yeah, the data's there. The thing is, you know, again, students with involved and engaged parents that are working with their students and not just letting them run loose, okay, free range, their students can learn in APS. They can learn, okay? The thing is if you're not engaged as a parent, the mother or the father is not engaged, the student's going to be on their own. And that's the worst thing. I mean, I'm a deacon in my church, so I go to the Bible. A child who's left to their own devices is lost. They are lost. They need to be controlled. They need to have constraints put on them. A student, there are good students. There are homeless students that go on to Ivy League schools.
Right.
There's something that's motivating in them, something that's unique in them. And one thing I said is find out what that is and try to replicate that. But when you have someone who's in this system and the pressure of the peers and everything like that takes away. We talk about building these nice schools to make kids want to come to school. You have 30% chronic absenteeism. It's not working. Look at the data. That's not why they're coming or not coming to school. There's something else going on. CYFD pulling them out or something like that, okay? You can build the fanciest schools and things like that. It's not going to make any difference, okay? We want to make them look like malls. When they built La Cueva High School, oh my goodness. I mean, I was just appalled. And my oldest son went to school there for 4 years, okay? But I was appalled at the lavish expense. But APS is awash in capital money. That's why they spend it that way.
Yes, that's why I had to get there.
And the thing is see, they tore down 2 gyms, functioning gyms at Manzano High School and built 2 brand new gyms. The gyms weren't falling apart or anything. Maybe they needed a new roof. Maybe the bathroom facilities need to be upgraded. But you didn't need to tear down the entire buildings. Oh, but they're so awash in capital funding. This is the problem at the state because you can't use capital funding for operations. But you can build these huge schools, but guess what? You have to use operating money to maintain them. So that takes money out of the classroom.
What was the year they tore down those schools?
At Manzano?
Yeah.
It was like 3 years ago.
Just 3 years ago. Okay. I was here in we moved in 1989 in New Mexico for the first time, and I got involved with getting money for the schools because they were so poor that the PTO was buying duplicated film for the teachers, and the kids had to handwrite books, and they didn't have books. My son brought home the music book. I thought that's good. They're getting new music books. They're getting rid of music in the school.
Well, I graduated in Manzano in 1971. There were 2,000 students at Manzano. My brother, the year before me, 714 students in his graduating class. Manzano right now has 1,600 students, and they have double the square footage as they did when I went there. Now you tell me where the priority is in APS. It's not the students. And see, you can go to the legislature and change the law. They can change the law to say, don't put so much money into capital. Prevent APS from having a $10.5 million levy that goes into capital. That can only be spent on capital. You can't spend that money on anything else, okay? The Jackson lawsuit and everything and made operational funding universal throughout the state, okay? But the capital, if APS has a large tax base, they have large property values, they have a lot of capital money. They don't get, very much money, if any, from the state for capital projects. Some smaller, poorer districts in the state can get up to 100% funding for their schools, but they don't build schools like Volcano Vista or Traditional Heritage. They don't build schools like that. And the PSCOC that Stuart serves on and that I served on, and I was, believe it or not, under under a Democrat administration, I was the only elected official, and Stuart's the only elected official on the PSCOC, Public School Capital Outlay Council. I served on this and sat right next to David Abbey, one of the most fiscally conservative people in the state, even though he's a Democrat. He and I saw eye to eye on we were doing things. He and Joe Ginn, who's another liberal Democrat, put me as the subcommittee chair of the
AMS.
AMS, the Administration Maintenance Standards Subcommittee. They put me in charge of that subcommittee, and I was dealing directly with the Public School Capital Outlay Facilities Authority. They're the ones that put me basically in charge, and I oversaw that. They were going to hire me to run that, and I decided, you know, that with my son at home and everything and whatnot, because his adult program ended after COVID, that I really felt I could not do that. Even though I had the knowledge and I had the will, I had to commit to my son first. But again, I can work with those individuals. And you know, like I said, here I was working with David Abbey, and I sat right next to him on that committee for 3 years. And I got along with them. But guess what? We got the Albuquerque Sign Language School, the first charter school in New Mexico to receive any substantial funding. That committee gave them $28 million to build a school for the deaf and hard of hearing students.
Well, I hate to tell you, because I broke my rule, that I am 20 minutes full time. I hope all of you feel that your time was not wasted, that you have something to take with you.
Just one question for Dave.
Sir?
I hear rumors that if someone gets elected, they're gonna get rid of the federal Department of Education.
That would be the best thing for this country. We didn't, prior to 1973, we didn't have a Department of Education.
I heard that one time about, well, you know who is running for president.
That would be the best thing you could do, and just give block grants to the state, and do away with the Department of Education.
Absolutely.
Treasury can handle that. And again, I mean, you know, I had almost 14 years in state government. I understand how state government works, but I have over 40 years in private sector. Yeah, I started working when I was -5. No, no, really, I mean, my first paid job, I was polishing apples for a road vendor. I got paid 10 cents for a basket, literally. But my first full-time job was working for my dad as a laborer. When I was 13, and 2 months later, I turned 14. So I've been working, and I've been paying Social Security for that. You know, I paid into that for a long, long time. But I think that the main thing is the Department of Education was the biggest mile point of when education really went downhill. It started going downhill before that. I think it went downhill when the Supreme Court said, you can't have prayer in school. Right. 1963. Right. That decision. It's like, do you realize what the McGuffey Reader actually says? It's a prayer, for heaven's sake, at the very beginning of that. Teaching the Bible is, if you're going to teach, have someone read Shakespeare, have someone read Keats, or something like that. You know how many of the quotes and the lines in those books and poems and everything are right from the Bible? The apple of the eye? People don't understand what that means. It's right out of the Bible. I mean, people have to understand, most of what we have in modern literature that's classical, I mean, in nature, all things new or all things old are new again. It's like we're coming up with, no, we're not. There's nothing new. The technology changes. Humans don't change that much. But I had a person when I was running for the school board. He wrote. He said, "Oh, I write and everything. I type everything." He says, "What's wrong with students typing?" And I said, "Sir, how did you learn how to read and write?" Cursive, and I said, "They don't even teach cursive." And I said, "They're starting to go back to that. A lot of schools are starting to go back because it wires the brain a certain way. It wires the brain a certain way. When you take that away," I said, "you type and you type all your books and everything." I said, "That's one. But you learned how to read and write with handwriting."
Since
Oh,
1998.
please
Okay.
do not forget. Please do not forget that the brain at the age of 3
fill in your.
has to have a complete mass up there, nothing with holes. So by the time you get to the end of the age of 3, what your child is going to face is those holes do not close up. So it has to be done from birth to the age of 3. And fortunately, the moms are there. And that's why we have to make the mothers know what their job is.
Where did you get all this information on the holes in the brain?
I have it on documentation, on a study detail, and it has the
I could probably talk for hours on this stuff. I only got through 2 pages of the 4 that I prepared.
Your pancakes are cold.
That's okay. I got the short stack, could you imagine?
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's so short.
Does that block?
Married to, yes, yes. How did you hear about it?
So this is magnetic. When I race,
I wanted to volunteer, so I go.
use all your strength, just don't use your teeth or my teeth.
Okay, so
Tommy, you've got to call your mom. They go up to the teacher like this.
They want the phone, parents can get in touch with them for emergencies. You can still let them have the possession of your phone.
They just put it on there.
But they lock it to where they can't use it. Unless it's an emergency, and then you if they have a lockdown in school, kids are unlocks all the phones, and the kids can get emails and everything.
Look how fast it
And I ran for Senate, 20.
No keys, no nothing.
No,
Kids
kids,
kids really
my
like
years,
to move the road. Now, the phone's not here. So,
and so District 2 down there.
I'm going to get $10 million. It's around the 41% to get this over every
I was thinking maybe it was
put it in
Oh, okay, well, we worked for the 3-year-old. What? Fill the holes in, fill the holes in. Well, we worked for last, this whole year on what's called a referendum project in our constitution allows us to referendum. Okay. Repeal some laws. Yeah. So I just got information on that, but that's just my information. Okay. But we, I mean, people have no clue what's happening. They don't, that these 6 laws are in place past 11 o'clock at night. Take away parent rights completely at that level. And so we believe have your you can't have an aspirin. You still can't have even aspirin at school. Yes, which is very invasive, beyond belief. It's life-threatening. Yeah.
Well, they can't do that.
And so that's what we worked on for this past year, that they shut us down. The Secretary of State and the Supreme Court basically came through to say that this is not going to happen, it's not going to be on the ballot. That's what our whole, but we got over 45,000, probably 48,000 people in all 33 counties to sign 6 petitions against these. But they shut it before the time. We're trying to find some way to get this to be on the ballot for people to decide, but we don't know that that's gonna do this. Yeah, it's just not. Well, what I heard, I've got tons of these. Let me give you a envelope in case you run into somebody. Okay, great. It just has. I was using it basically early on for
That's fine. I'm in district 4.
But I said,
Hi, how are you? Good morning.
Hi, good to see you. But we're discussing my candidate. Sounds good. Okay. Thank you very much, Rick. Me too.
Will you come to the meetings on that Monday, Friday?
this family missed.
With Frank Rubelo.
This family they would get
Yeah,
together
yeah.
and they
Oh.
said, this is the correct.
With,
this is
with
the-
running,
this is the
we got
correct."
yeah, things going, try we make it at times, but we got
We've lost
going on. Yeah.
We've
Great,
because
congratulations.
we had
Good luck.
electronics
Thank you,
back
great.
back
Yeah.
in the 20s and the 40s and 50s when television started coming in.
There's no self-directing, and it's manipulation now. It's all about
But this is the thing that is.
Thank you. I was, are you
This is the thing, whenever I sing or start thinking, you know what I imagine? I picture Fort McHenry and that, the bombs bursting in the air and coming in and landing near, they actually had, one of the salvos hit the armory at Fort McHenry, and it did not go off. Otherwise, it would have obliterated the entire fort. It didn't go off. That's a God-inspired thing that didn't happen. But I visualize Fort McHenry, and I visualize that huge flag flying there, and what Princess Scott Keith. Whenever I hear that song, that's what I see. I don't just sit there and think, oh, we're gonna have a great football game, a great baseball game. I visualize that. And that's where songs are so, music is so, I mean, I love Christian songs, but you know,
Is it easier for me to go? I can take it for you, don't worry, I'll be right back. Okay,
and I
thank you.
forget who the singer was and everything, but we started singing the crowd started singing, and everybody in our church started singing this song. From the 70s or 80s. Because we still remember the song.
It's a neural pathway that gets burned, it's in there.
It's there forever.
Well, you know what's incredible? We had a student from Estonia, and in Estonia they have this. They all the 80% of the population gets together at one time of the year and does sings. They got and we saw and during the time when Estonia was being overrun with the communism, that was their only thing that they still were able to maintain that community thing, and it was safe. I mean, honestly, yeah, they didn't fight back. They couldn't. They were overrun physically, but they could never break their spirit.
I saw this video on Instagram. It was a younger lady, I say young because I'm 7,100 days before I'm 70.
Wow!
So she was a younger lady with her father who had advanced questions. Couldn't even remember who she was. She started singing a song that they used to sing together when she was a child. And he just looked at her and reached out and said her name. Hadn't said it for decades. Reached out and realized who she was because that song connected a neural pathway to where he remembered, hadn't recognized her for years and years. It's amazing what songs do. And it's not just, I mean, look at Wales. How do Wales communicate? Using songs. Dolphins, same thing. You think of these things, and it's like music and everything. I mean, the Psalms in the Bible. Those are songs. They weren't just things that they read. They sung those.
I remember
They sung those to remember them.
You know, our kids, oh, sorry.
It's just burning in of the process.
Our kids were at Parkview Baptist, and we had a kindergarten teacher there who was like renowned. German taught, piano in the room, everything was sung, like you're saying. And just